After the legalization of cannabis in one US state, campaigners hope the rest of the country will follow suit. Others believe that would open the floodgates to narcotics abuse of all kinds. In the first of two special reports, Bob Abeshouse asks who's right and if America has now reached a tipping point in its war on drugs.
A new business is rising in America's Rocky Mountain West, and sales promise to be brisk.
And then 100 of the DJ shorts and $100 of the Tahoe.
This past January, licensed shops in Colorado began selling recreational marijuana to anyone 21 years of age or older.
Ooh, that smells nice.
Prices range from $14 to $25 a gram.
What's the difference between the Ultimate 91 Ken Dog and the Ken Dog 8?
In a November 2012 ballot, voters in Colorado and Washington state approved the sale of marijuana in retail shops like alcohol.
I've had biodiesel. I'm more of an indica girl.
Colorado put its plan for recreational cannabis sales into action first. Colorado already had a system to regulate the sale of cannabis for medical use. Until July, only medical marijuana dispensaries can apply for a recreational sales license.
This is our facility. It's 13,000 square feet where we produce 100% of the marijuana that we sell on our shelves.
Kayvon Khalid-Bari is one of the owners of Denver Relief, a downtown pot dispensary.
We're going to be reporting to the state on a daily basis how many plants we're growing, how much product we have on hand, how much we sold that day.
Why do you think Colorado was one of the first states to legalize marijuana?
Money was a big part, obviously. The first $40 million that we are collecting on a yearly basis through sales tax on social use marijuana is going directly to Colorado school renovation and construction.
The fiscal pressures cities and states are facing is generating new support for cannabis legalization in America. It is estimated that retail sales would produce about $9 billion a year in government revenue. Another $8 billion is required to enforce marijuana laws across the U.S. The ads to pass the Colorado Pot Initiative, Proposition 64, talked about securing new sources of revenue now going to drug cartels in Mexico. They also argued that marijuana is safer than alcohol.
Studies that are coming out every day does show that it is much less addictive, that it is much less detrimental on a person's body. And in some cases, it's very helpful. It is being used in all sorts of cancer research these days.
20 U.S. states and the District of Columbia allow medical sales, and 85% of Americans approve of marijuana's use if authorized by a physician. 58% favor outright legalization.
It's this new generation of people that understand. They've seen generations of marijuana smokers come through, and they understand that it's not as harmful as people think.
No more! Drug war! No more!
Many believe that the legalization of marijuana across the whole of the United States is only a matter of time.
No more! No more! War on people! No more!
But they have more than 4 decades of federal government antagonism to overcome.
Public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
The war on drugs was launched by President Richard Nixon in 1971.
In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
Since then, the United States has spent more than $1 trillion fighting drugs at home and abroad.
By next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
But reformers are attracting increasing support for their argument that the war on drugs has been a waste of effort and money.
We've hit the tipping point because of what Colorado and Washington did.
Ethan Nadelman is the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. More than 1,000 people from the U.S. and abroad attended the Alliance's biennial meeting in Denver last October.
We have in America been truly exceptional. Nobody in the history of democratic societies has locked up our fellow citizens the way that we do.
Driven by the war on drugs and tough-on-crime policies, the prison population in the U.S. has increased from about 400,000 in 1970 to more than 2.3 million today.
I want our rates of incarceration to be the middle.
We're building a political movement, and this is the gathering where basically we bring people together.
Has this conference grown over the years you've been working on drug legalization issues?
When we started, we were on the fringes, barely, of American politics. Now we still got one foot on the fringe, but the other foot solidly in the mainstream. Because we're changing real laws at the state level and even the federal law. We're winning ballot initiatives.
The people in this movement are dedicated to rolling back criminal justice solutions to drugs and replacing them with public health harm reduction strategies.
For decades and decades, people have been led to believe marijuana is much more harmful than it actually is.
Mason Tvert was the campaign director for the Proposition 64 campaign in Colorado. He now works with the Marijuana Policy Project, which aims to legalize pot in 12 more states by 2016.
We're going to have to go about ballot initiatives in some states, but also through the legislature in some states.
The marijuana legalization advocates have been able to raise millions, right?
It's still going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money our federal government has spent demonizing this substance and working to make it illegal and keep it illegal.
I spent most of my life working along the borders and in Central and South America trying to stem the flow of narcotics.
Terry Nelson fought the war on drugs for 32 years as a federal agent.
Drugs have gotten cheaper, of higher grade than they were in the beginning, and more people are using than they were in the beginning. So it's a total failure, and you need to change the policy to something that works.
Nelson belongs to an organization of ex-cops, federal agents, and judges called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, or LEAP.
We believe that with legalization and regulation and control, we can reduce the crime and violence associated with the drug trade by about 80%. We believe the drug problem is best fixed through education and treatment instead of arrest and incarceration.
But the vast majority of active law enforcement officials opposed the U.S. Justice Department's decision last August to allow Colorado and Washington State to proceed with their legalization plans.
We will continue to rely on state and local authorities to effectively enforce their own drug laws.
Deputy Attorney General James Cole announced that the department would back off, even though cannabis is illegal under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. He listed key conditions that had to be met.
Preventing the distribution of marijuana to minors. Preventing the diversion of marijuana from states where it is legal under state law to other states. Preventing drugged driving and the exacerbation of other public health consequences associated with marijuana use.
We decided to send a letter to the Attorney General.
Bob Bushman and other leaders of major law enforcement associations challenged the Justice Department's decision. Bushman is president of the National Narcotics Officers Associations Coalition. It represents about 60,000 federal, state, and local drug enforcement officers.
I had a 30-year career in narcotics enforcement. I did a lot of undercover work, conspiracy cases involving importation, distribution, and trafficking of large quantities of different types of drugs.
What's your opinion of the war on drugs?
One of the things that gets lost during this conversation is that law enforcement has had a lot to do with getting the rates of use and abuse down, with addressing the violent crime issues that surround the drug problem.
Do you think that the legalization of pot in the United States has reached a tipping point?
Not yet. Certainly, it has some momentum. There's no doubt about that. But I'm not ready to throw in the towel, neither are a lot of the people that I work with.
What are your major concerns about the legalization of marijuana?
You're going to have more use and you're going to have more abuse. You're going to have more people trying it out. I think that's one of the things, it's the signal that sends to young people that maybe it's not so bad. We're starting to see scientific information now that shows that young people using marijuana show the effects during brain development.
The ads urging voters to oppose the Colorado legalization initiative emphasize the concerns that some medical professionals have about potential health effects.
Chronic marijuana use has been associated with an array of psychological effects, including depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and personality disturbances.
We need to do the research first, come down to some scientific certainties before they move ahead with putting it out there and then going backwards like we did with alcohol and cigarettes.
We can control it, and we can tax it, and we can make sure we know what's happening with it.
What do you say to the argument that the legalization of marijuana is going to harm kids?
For the last 3 or 4 decades, about 80% of high school seniors have reported being able to get marijuana very easily or fairly easily. That's a failed policy, and it's time for a new approach.
Legalization advocates have some powerful opponents, law enforcement, physicians.
People have been hearing from the federal government and law enforcement officials about marijuana for years, and they are now seeing through all the misinformation that's been spread.
It's all about the money.
Nelson says law enforcement has a powerful self-interest in perpetuating cannabis prohibition.
And I'll give you an example. If a police officer arrests a kid today, he goes to court tomorrow, and he's going to get 3 hours of overtime just for showing up and testifying. Many police departments, their overtime pay is almost as much as the officer makes normally. It's a money train.
More than 750,000 arrests a year, half of all drug arrests in America, are for marijuana. About 90% of those arrests are for possession. New York is one of the states with the most marijuana arrests. Between 2004 and 2012, New York City police stopped and frisked about 4.5 million people, most African American.
Time is 20 to 9. We're on 126th Street, 7th Avenue.
356,000 were arrested for possessing small amounts of pot.
Yeah, ain't that something, man? That's a major crime, right?
Harlem was an open-air prison.
Joseph Hayden, who founded a neighborhood media company called All Things Harlem, was determined to stop the practice by filming it.
The guy that they hemmed up in that phone booth was a businessman. His business was about 5 feet away from where he was stopped.
Why did you become involved in filming stop and frisk?
Everywhere we looked in the community, we saw flashing lights and people being pulled over, and kids lined up against the wall.
How did the police react when they saw you out there with a camera?
Well, at first it was difficult. You know, they challenged us every step of the way, but we stood our ground. Stop and frisk is a tool to maintain social control. It's an abuse of power.
They're doing this mostly in minority areas, so that blacks and Latinos are far more likely to get a record for these very minor marijuana violations. This is my police officer's shield, Sergeant.
Johnny Turno retired as a New York City police captain in 2004. He's an expert on a law enforcement management tool called CompStat that measures police performance.
They're comparing commanders always to last year's figures. So it's not just with summonses, it's also with arrests, it's with stop and frisk.
Did CompStat lead to quotas for policemen here in New York?
CompStat most definitely led to quotas in New York City.
Promotions, job assignments, and other benefits depend on whether police officers make their summons and arrest numbers.
If they don't meet their quota, officers could be given a very unpalatable work assignment. For example, on a freezing cold night, you get a foot post or a fixer where you just have to stand there all night. The sergeant can also deny you a vacation.
The pressures on New York City police were so great that some actually did undercover recordings of their superiors.
When I say make it up, but you can always articulate robbery, burglary, whatever the case is. Somebody stop. It's still a number. It keeps the hounds off.
The recordings were introduced in a federal lawsuit last year that challenged the stop and frisk practices of New York City police.
If you don't want to be on a foot post, the best thing to do is stop people, all right? You're going to either pop a warrant, you're going to get somebody with a gun, somebody with a knife, somebody with weed, and there's going to be a collar, and then you're in the house, and you're processing your collar. You're off the street.
That's a clear threat. That's the quota. That's telling the officers, look, you better do this or you're going on that foot post.
So if officers are getting pressure to meet the numbers, they're going to go out and arrest people for marijuana because it's an easy arrest to make.
That's correct.
Less than 0.5% of the stops resulted in a gun arrest, but pot possession became the #1 arrest in New York City. The judge in the stop and frisk case found that it amounted to a policy of indirect racial profiling.
Is CompStat just in New York?
We've seen it in many, many different cities. So this is not just a problem in New York City. It may not be that individual officers are racist at all, but the policy that this performance management culture has introduced is racist.
Those arrests can lead to you not being able to gain employment. The big question in the application, have you ever been arrested before, always pops up.
We spoke about stop and frisk.
Alfredo Carrasquillo is with the community action group Vocal New York. He works with minority youth who have been arrested for possessing small amounts of pot.
And how about you, Ruth?
I explained to my boss what happened. He was like, well, you're fired.
While most go to jail for only a few days or are given a ticket to appear in court, the long-lasting effects can be profound.
It can definitely impact financial aid. You can not apply for certain scholarships once you obtain a criminal record.
Mass incarceration is targeting.
Carrasquillo was arrested for marijuana possession as a teenager and has been subjected to stop and frisks several times.
I go from feeling violated to feeling, why is this happening to me? You're a free citizen walking the street, minding your business on an average day, and in an instant, you can get stopped and frisked and thrown in jail for a small bag of marijuana.
So this is the report we did on marijuana arrests around the country.
Ezekiel Edwards is the director of the Criminal Law Reform Project for the American Civil Liberties Union.
We documented that blacks were almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites, despite equal usage rates. Go to many major cities, from Sarasota, Florida, to Chicago, you'll see that blacks were 10, 15, sometimes 20 times as likely.
What's the connection between marijuana arrests and the war on drugs?
If you look at, it's not just marijuana, if you look at racial bias in all drug arrests, who gets stopped, who gets arrested when they're caught with contraband, what are people charged with, what sentences do they face, you see racial bias at every step of the criminal justice system.
Do you think that pot legalization is important in addressing the racial aspects of the war on drugs?
Marijuana legalization is critical to addressing the racial aspects of the war on drugs.
If we legalize marijuana, what's the next section of the law that we decide, well, you know, it's not fair to criminalize that we decriminalize?
Some people argue that that's a better approach to legalize all of the drugs.
I disagree. When you relax your laws, when you relax the accountability, people take advantage of, they use and abuse more. There's no consequences.
Isn't there an economic interest in preserving the illegality of marijuana among law enforcement?
No. That's not the driver behind this. It's not. It's the problems with drug abuse. We're still going to have a ton of costs, but they're going to show up in all the tragedies and the things that happen with using the drug.
The advocates argue that the human costs that are being paid by young people, by people of color, are greater than the social costs that would result from legalizing marijuana.
Those arguments just don't hold water with me and people in the law enforcement system, because we are not out there targeting marijuana users.
More than 700,000 marijuana possession arrests last year. Those are serious individual costs to society.
And there are people that feel the other way. Do you think it's wrong for an employer to make a decision on a person whether or not they have a criminal record or whether or not they use drugs?
People believe that the war on drugs, the war on marijuana, has a racial component, that there's racial bias to it.
We respond to complaints from the community, we respond to tips that people give us. They call 911, they call the police and expect us to do something about it. When we respond, you know, we do what's appropriate.
Police get a lot of funding from the federal government and from the states in which they operate to fight the drug war.
People argue that you need to treat marijuana use and other drug use as a criminal matter because the only way to help people is to have that coercive tool.
That pressure has to come from friends, treatment centers, family, interventions. It should not be coming from police, judges, and prisons.
Some law enforcement people I've spoken to say that people of color want aggressive policing in their communities. They want the drug dealers off the street.
That's not what stop and frisk and what lots of police departments and their kind of flooding neighborhood tactics have done. What they've done is basically criminalized entire communities. If you took that same policing tactic and went to college campuses across the country, you'd also find a lot of marijuana.
Edwards says marijuana arrest numbers help police departments and narcotics task forces secure funding.
Marijuana arrests are a very easy form of drug arrest to generate. So it looks like that they're being productive for federal funding to say, see, we implemented this drug program and look at all the misdemeanor and in few cases felony arrests we made.
In Arizona, the top recipient of federal money from the state's Criminal Justice Commission is the Counter Narcotics Alliance, a multi-jurisdictional drug task force in the Tucson area.
Do you have a medical marijuana card?
Absolutely. I have this one right here, and here you can see that it was authorized to cultivate.
Leonard Ray is well acquainted with the Counter Narcotics Alliance. He was forced to move out of his home after they broke down his door in July 2012.
The SWAT team was lined up against my garage right here, And between these two plants is where I went down, and they jumped on me. About where between those two purple plants was where my son was falling backwards as they were pointing their weapons at him. After they had me cuffed, they went ahead and just went straight into the house and were setting off flashbang grenades.
Someone had reported that Ray had an illegal marijuana grow and was smoking marijuana with his teenage son.
On my arm here, as a matter of fact, I've had...
Cannabis helps Ray and his son cope with osteochondroma. It's a condition in which benign tumors of cartilage and bone form in the joints. He had several surgeries.
Marijuana helps me sleep. I have a really hard time sleeping due to the pain. I got a medical marijuana card from my son, Zachary, for tumors also. He has pain, severe pain in his leg. He actually had to have a wire shoved down his tibia.
Under Arizona's medical marijuana law, Ray could grow 12 plants for himself and 12 for his son. A friend with a medical marijuana card also had 8 cannabis plants in Ray's grow room. The Narcotics Alliance charged Ray with 4 drug-related felonies and had his son and a daughter removed for child abuse. They also emptied his home of all his property.
They brought this truck, they backed it up right here, and this truck was probably bigger than the biggest U-Haul you can get, and they were just loading it up.
Last May, a judge ruled that the Counter Narcotics Alliance raided Ray's house with an illegal search warrant. All the charges against him were dropped. Ray got his children back, but not his property, under a process known as civil asset forfeiture.
I felt that they went after me especially hard because they knew I couldn't fight. I couldn't pay for the filing fees anymore, so they forfeited all my belongings. I lost everything.
Civil asset forfeiture is really a mechanism by which the state and federal government can seize people's property without having to convict them of a crime. Most people can't afford to hire a lawyer to challenge it. It's really legalized robbery by law enforcement.
In 2012, U.S. law enforcement authorities seized more than $4 billion through civil asset forfeiture, the vast majority in drug-related cases.
There are police departments driving cars and using equipment that they basically confiscated or paid for through civil asset forfeiture. If you didn't have marijuana prohibition, then many of the reasons that the police used to say that this property was connected to illegal activity would disappear.
The Tucson Police Department is the lead agency for the Counter Narcotics Alliance.
Through Phoenix and then branch out to different
Roberto Villaseñor is the department chief.
If marijuana was legalized, it would have an impact on financial conditions across the country. It's not just my department. I think there are a lot of departments that obviously receive funding to enforce narcotic violations.
What do you say to those who argue that asset seizure and forfeiture is a major motivation for going after medical marijuana card holders?
It's not as lucrative as everyone makes it out to be.
In 2012, the Counter Narcotics Alliance seized almost $3 million in assets, and the county attorney's office took in more than $7 million. That's $10 million. I mean, that's quite a sum of money, isn't it?
Let's not lose sight of the fact that we're not talking about taking away hard-earned money of legal working individuals. We're talking about people who are preying on society.
But would you agree with me that the asset forfeiture laws were really made to go after drug kingpins,
I think
big
they were
dealers?
designed to help disrupt narcotic traffickers' operations, yes.
Would you agree with me that if it's being applied against medical marijuana patients, that might not be how it was intended?
Is it appropriate that we go back and look at it in regards to that? I think so.
Police have been fighting fiercely a drug war for 40 years. And a huge component of that is marijuana. As part of that drug war, they have been stopping and frisking and searching and arresting people, seizing their property, millions of dollars, cars, homes, and using increasingly militarized tactics, SWAT teams, kicking down doors, going in as if they're now in Fallujah. I don't think you can just overnight change that culture. It's going to take time.
In next week's episode, People in Power goes to Louisiana, where marijuana possession can get you life behind bars. And Mexico, where drug legalization is seen as a key to ending drug cartel violence.